Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into something fascinating, one of those big questions from philosophy but also neuroscience now. Is your red the same as my red?
It's a classic, right? Really cuts to the heart of subjective experience, how you personally see the world.
Exactly. And we're pulling from some really interesting stuff today, like research in mapping red, unveiling the neuroscience of qualia. And there's a great article in there by Speen Hassenfelder called, well, is your red the same as my red?
Aptly named.
Right. So our mission really is to see how this thing that feels so private, so internal, like, the feeling of red, how science might actually be starting to get a grip on it.
Yeah, moving it from pure philosophy into something measurable. It's pretty exciting stuff.
Definitely expect some surprises, maybe some mind expansion along the way. Okay, so let's start with a key term here, qualia. What exactly are we talking about?
Qualia. Right, so they're the subjective qualities of experience.
So what its likeness.
What its likeness, okay?
Yeah.
Like seeing red. Exactly, that specific internal feeling you get when you see a red apple. That sensation of redness. That's a quail. Or, the taste of chocolate, the feeling of pain.
Got it. The personal subjective feel of things.
Yeah.
And traditionally that's been seen as, well, pretty much unshareable, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Fundamentally private. I mean, we had philosophers like Thomas Nagel.
Oh, the bat essay, what is it like to be a bat?
That's the one. He argued, look, you can know everything physical about a bat, its brain, its sonar, everything, but you still wouldn't know what it actually feels like to be that bat.
Right. The subjective experience is just inaccessible from the outside.
Exactly. And then David Chalmers comes along with his famous hard problem of consciousness.
A hard problem, yeah.
Yeah, he basically said, even if we map out the entire brain, understand all its functions, we still can't explain why we have subjective experience at all. Why does all that processing feel like anything?
So the traditional view is basically qualia are real, they're private, and science probably can't touch them.
Pretty much. Locked inside your head. Unmeasurable. That was the standard thinking for a long, long time.
Okay, but things are changing, aren't they? That's the whole point here.
Yeah.
What if science can start to measure qualia?
Precisely. That's the exciting pivot. New research is really starting to push back against that traditional view.
So tell us about that. What's the evidence?
Well, there's this really interesting study. They took 35 people, showed them different colors, and watched their brains using fMRI.
fMRI. So looking at brain activity, blood flow.
Yeah, exactly. Functional magnetic resonance imaging. It shows which parts of the brain are working harder. And what they found was pretty remarkable.
Okay.
They discovered these consistent patterns, they called them neural signatures, that popped up when different people looked at the same color.
Wait, so my brain pattern for red looks kind of like your brain pattern for red?
That's the implication. It suggests that the way our brains process that redness isn't totally unique and private after all. There seems to be a common structural basis.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, that is a big deal. So your red and my red might actually be neurally similar.
It certainly points that way. It suggests these experiences aren't as unmeasurable or purely private as, Nagel or Chalmers might have originally thought. It's a concrete step towards maybe mapping subjective states.
That fMRI study really does shake things up. And it fits with some other ideas too, right? I remember reading about Anil Seth's work, something about predictive modeling.
Ah, yes, Anil Seth. His framework is really relevant here. He talks about the brain as a prediction machine.
Okay, prediction machine. How does that work?
Well, the idea is your brain isn't just passively receiving information from the senses. It's constantly predicting what sensory input it's about to receive based on, past experience, context, everything.
So it's making guesses about the world.
Constantly. And when the actual input doesn't match the prediction, that's like an error signal. The brain updates its internal model. Consciousness, in this view, arises from this whole predictive process.
And where do qualia, like redness, fit into that?
Seth suggests they're actually fundamental to these predictions. They're like the building blocks the brain uses to model the world and make sense of sensory data. Color helps us categorize, predict, navigate.
So qualia aren't just some weird byproduct. They're actually functional within this predictive system.
Exactly. And if they're part of this system, this predictive model, well, then maybe we can map them. Maybe we can turn these subjective feels into something measurable, even visualizable.
It connects back to the fMRI study then. If qualia are part of a predictive mechanism, maybe those neural signatures are reflections of that mechanism at work.
Precisely. It provides a theoretical underpinning for why we might expect to find those common patterns.
And it's not just theory, right? Aren't the groups actually trying to, well, map this stuff? I think I heard about the Qualia Research Institute.
Yes, absolutely. The Qualia Research Institute, they're doing fascinating work. They're trying to build essentially a mathematical model of consciousness.
A mathematical model. Wow. What does that even look like?
Well, the goal is ambitious. They want to create what they call a state space of consciousness. Think of it like a map, but multidimensional, charting out all the different possible subjective experiences.
A map of feelings.
In a way, yeah. To categorize different kinds of subjective states, define their properties, maybe find their underlying mathematical structure.
The point of that would be?
Ultimately, to allow for comparison, maybe even sharing of experiences, not just between people.
Across species.
Mm.
Like understanding the bat.
That's the moonshot goal, yeah. Imagine if we could actually truly understand what it's like to be a dog or a bat or, anything else with consciousness, experientially, not just intellectually.
Mind. Blown. Okay. So with science heading in this direction, what's happening back in philosophy?
Mm.
Are the philosophers who said impossible starting to reconsider?
Some definitely are. You're seeing a shift. Remember how the traditional view often treated color as just a subjective illusion, something only in our heads?
Right. No objective reality to redness itself.
Well, now some philosophers are arguing, wait a minute, maybe color is objectively real. Yeah. Just like, say, temperature is real or mass is real. It's a property of the world that our brains detect.
So moving away from illusion towards objective property.
Exactly. There's a new book out, actually, called The Metaphysics of Color that makes this case. It argues against that purely subjective view. So yeah, the scientific findings are definitely influencing the philosophical debate.
But surely not everyone's convinced, right?
Yeah.
What about the philosophers holding on to the hard problem?
Oh, absolutely. The debate is still very much alive. Many would still argue, look, mapping brain patterns, finding neural correlates, that's great. But it still doesn't explain the raw feel, what its likeness.
They'd say correlation isn't explanation.
Precisely. You're showing what happens when we see red, but not why seeing red feels like that. So the conversation is ongoing, very dynamic. But the key thing is, science is now a major player in a debate that used to be almost purely philosophical.
Okay, so stepping back, the implications of all this seem huge. For everyone, really, if our inner worlds aren't quite so locked away.
The implications are staggering, yeah. Think about it. If we could genuinely share experiences one day.
Not just describe them, but actually feel what someone else feels.
Exactly. Imagine the impact on empathy, truly understanding another person's pain or joy, or even just their perception of color.
It would change everything. How we relate to each other, how we define ourselves.
Absolutely. Identity, connection. If you can tap into someone else's subjective world, what does self even mean anymore? It could fundamentally reshape, well, our whole understanding of consciousness and our place in the universe. Seeing through another's eyes, literally or figuratively.
Wow. So we've gone from this kind of abstract philosophical puzzle is your red, my red, all the way to neuroscience, suggesting maybe we can measure redness, map it, maybe even share it someday.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? From unanswerable mystery to potential scientific mapping.
It really has.
Yeah.
Which leaves us with a pretty big thought to ponder, doesn't it? Here's something to really chew on. If these deepest, most private inner experiences, seeing red, feeling happy, whatever it is, if they aren't as uniquely private as we always assumed, if they could potentially be mapped, understood, maybe even shared, what does that really mean for who you are? And what does it mean for how connected we all might be, every conscious being?
Deep questions. Really deep.
Definitely food for thought.
Yeah.
And hey, speaking of brilliant minds tackling complex stuff, as a little bonus for you listeners who like to keep learning, Sabine Hossenfelder, who wrote that key article we mentioned,
Yeah.
she actually has a fantastic course over on brilliant.org. It's about quantum mechanics, gets into wave functions, superposition, entanglement, Bell's theorem, even quantum computing.
Another area full of mind-bending ideas.
Totally. So if you enjoy wrapping your head around complex concepts made accessible, that's definitely worth checking out. It's another great example of exploring the frontiers of science.